Thank you very much, and thank you, Wendy, and all the organizers of this conference for having me here. And as some of you might know, Klaus Piers was scheduled to talk in this panel, but unfortunately he couldn't join us, so I jumped in for him. Yeah. So better now? So Klaus Piers unfortunately wasn't able to join us, which is why I jumped in for him, and which is also the reason why I wasn't able to prepare something new. So what I'm presenting here is, it's part of work that I did for the last years, but it's kind of finished work now. But yeah, I think it fits well into the topic, and in a way it's a kind of a historical perspective on the same questions that Lisa posed in her talk. So from the 18th century to the present day, a variety of historiographical narratives concerned with topics ranging from philosophy to sociology and media theory have attempted to draw a connection between the comprehensive transformation known as globalization and the increases in speed that have been brought about by electric media. This transformation has largely been attributed to acceleration, and acceleration in turn has come to be regarded as a defining feature of modernity. Distance could no longer be considered as a limiting factor of human exchange, a fact that is underscored all the more today by the ubiquity of so-called smart communication. As effects of media and as engines of historical development, acceleration and speed not only possess a function for the communities that they bind together or separate, they also possess a function for media theories that attempt to explain them. With the advent of electromagnetic telegraphy in the 1830s, a notion emerging from the history of the sciences of electricity diffused into popular knowledge: the instantaneous transmission of electric action. Ever since Stephen Gray, more of an amateur than what would nowadays be called a scientist, explored the possibility of electric transmissions through long copper wires in 1730, the speed of electricity was an object of investigation. This knowledge fosters to the rise of telegraphy a century later and defines the epistemological and technological foundations of the new medium, which became the conceptual basis of the transmission media of the 20th and also of the 21st century. Experiments with electric transmissions revealed that electricity apparently had no speed. It was impossible to measure any temporal difference between the events at the two ends of an electrically charged wire. The notion of instantaneity, which was quickly introduced to explain the strange occurrences, implied that electricity was present at both ends of the wire at the same instant, instantaneous and immediate. The historical context of this notion was the foundation of physics and philosophy, because for Newtonian physics and for Aristotelian logic, nothing can act where it is not, and nothing can be at two places at the same time. But this seems to be the case with electric actio in distans, action at a distance. By investigating the impacts of these fundamental philosophical questions on the infrastructures of electrical media, I intend to explore what may be called the phantasmatic dimension of infrastructures. In the historical discourses I want to explore, these notions can stand shoulder to shoulder without contradiction. So the idea that there is immediacy and the idea that there is no immediacy, that there is a medium in between. This coherence in contradiction, I want to argue, borrowing from Derrida, quote, expresses the force of a desire. And this desire accompanies the history of media and communication. Methodically, the discussion of such a coherence in contradiction should not aim at any solution, as a desire cannot be false or true. It is part of the history of media, and in the case of the electric telegraph, it exerts a distinct productivity in the formation of global communication networks. In telegraphy, much depends upon the difference between slow speed and no speed. This difference may seem small, but it means everything to physics and to media. If something has speed, it cannot be instantaneous. When it has speed, it takes time and is delayed. If it is delayed, then there is a gap or an abyss between both ends of the transmission. This abyss is disguised or negated by instantaneity, while it is necessary for communication, media, and the materialities. Communication needs at least two communicators and an in-between. There must be a difference between the communicators, and they must be two to become one, and necessarily there must be a third, the medium. On a warm summer day in 1730, as Stephen Gray reported in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, electricity was transmitted over a distance through a copper wire for the first time. And actually, I think Wolfgang Hagen would speak about this, this hand without the arm that you see in this painting tomorrow. There was a distance of 666 and later 868 feet between the two ends of the wire, and there was a difference between a cause and an effect, which nonetheless seemed to happen at the same time. Gray called this connection a line of communication. He had no idea about cables and did not know anything about induction, isolation, or charges. In the sciences of his time, physical transmissions were named communication, which did not mean to send a message to someone else, but to transmit an action to another place, for example, between bodies, between stars, or between the ends of a wire. Gray touched his end of the wire with a charged tube of glass, and at the same instant, with, quote, no perceivable difference, quote end, the electric action was carried to the other end, resulting in the dance of some pieces of brass gold located under the wire. Gray's friend Granville Wheeler, a priest and the owner of the estate where this experiment took place, shouted that something had happened in the distance of 666 feet, while Gray was still at the other end of the garden. As both were not able to recognize any temporal difference between the electric occurrences at both ends of the wire, even as the wire was arranged in a circle in later experiments, they were described as instantaneous, as happening at the same time, as having no difference and no mediation. Besides the technical aspects of transmission, there is a paradox at hand here. If there is a distance and a communication in the physical sense, that means if there are two separate elements communicating and trying to bridge the abyss in between them and to cross an empty space, like the garden between Gray and Wheeler, then there is a mediation or the mediating transmission between separate elements. And if there is mediation, then there is a contradiction to the notion of instantaneity, which results in what I want to call phantasms of immediacy. These phantasms, up to today and all the time during the great days of telegraphy in the long 19th century, were important to balance the imaginative economy of communication that means its relation of here and there, or of local and global. However, all electricians of the time, whether physicists or engineers, knew very, very well that nothing could move with an instantaneous speed because action at a distance is impossible, even though this was a complicated issue for the Newtonian physics of that time, and it still is a complicated issue for quantum mechanics. The premise that nothing can act where it is not, at least if there is no medium, dates back to antiquity. Aristotle announced that every cause needs to be in contact with and have proximity to its effect. This contact was disconnected with actions at a distance, such as gravitation, magnetism, or electricity. The theoretical framework of physical sciences had to be reorganized repeatedly to manage these interruptions of causality and of the nexus of time and space. If there is a causal relation of two separate bodies, then a medium must communicate between them, even if it is immediate. That means if it is at two places at the same time. This constellation is the matrix for the media of physics, for ethers, vacua, and for most subtle spirits, as Newton called them, and also for the technical media of our time. As a phantasm, instantaneity provided economic benefits as well as metaphysical forms of connections and new cultural self-understandings. A new conception of communication and of community had emerged, a worldwide connection of all people. This destiny is obvious in a popular song which served as the motto of the contemporary magazine The Telegrapher, quote, "Intellect had conquered time," quote end. By conquering time, intellect erased it. Electricity, it seemed, could be everywhere at once and resulted in essentialistic ideas of a worldwide community, anticipating what would later be called a global village by Marshall McLuhan, who implicitly relied on these notions. Time and space, in this sense, were supposed to be transcended in no time and from anywhere. In an article dating back to 1857, a member of the American Telegraph Company, launched in 1855 to operate the terrestrial lines connecting connecting to a possible transatlantic telegraph cable, described this telepresence as was described in the 1990s with this word telepresence. Quote, "We publish the following novel and interesting account of a meeting of the employees of the American Telegraph Company on the 3rd instant at what place? That is the question. At no place or at all places where there were telegraph offices within the circuit of 700 miles. A large room that, 700 miles in diameter, for a meeting to convene. The members together in spirit, in communication, and yet embody 700 miles apart. In this sense, the place of presence is everywhere, connected by cables and immediate electricity. Electricity allowed telegraphers to build connections, even though it took time, even though relays were used at every station, and even though every message had to be decoded in time. The annihilation of space and time, which was a popular phrase in the 19th century, led to conceptions of a global worldwide unity. So when Gray for the first time communicated an electric action through a wire, but without any message or code, a space was established between the two ends of the garden and the two communicators. Through the expansion of a global communication network by means of wired and wireless telegraphy, this space would later become the global space of electric media. But still, since it had to be decoded, the time of transmission is shorter than the time of reception, and it is thus framed by practical margins. The speed of electricity is not the same as the speed of the signal. A signal has to be on time, rechtzeitig in German, on time, instead of real time, echtzeitig in German, to assure a successful communication. In time means that transmission has to conform to a given interval of time, a duration in which it has to arrive. These time-critical synchronizations form the technical basis of all telegraphs and still of all computers and all technical devices. But still, the interventions of the telegraph in society's self-descriptions were marked by instantaneity. During the 19th century, the economic and technological arrangements of information retrieval changed rapidly. The need to control no longer referred to the accessible surroundings or to face-to-face arrangements between, for example, factory directors and merchants, but to relations of space that were distant, but to relations of spaces that were distant and therefore required time-critical media. Control, understood with James Banniger as the ability to exercise power at other places, had to be fast and increasingly dependent on the speed of the railroad or the express boat. At the same time, factories began to ship by rail and to produce on the fly. Raw material was processed immediately after the delivery because storage became expensive and transportation available. To ensure the time-sensitive distribution of these resources, communication was needed that was faster than physical transport, electric telegraphy. The crisis of control that, following Banniger, characterized the middle of the 19th century was soothed and sometimes also intensified by telegraphic transmission. It established the means to exercise power in other places at the same time. Telegraph and railway, as well as modern bridges, channels, and cable connections, allowed the management of contingency. But these achievements were reinforced by instantaneity. According to the London Times of August 6, 1858, quote, "We may, now that the most difficult problem of all has been solved," that means the connection between Europe and the US, "that this most difficult problem of all has been solved, be justified in anticipating that there is no portion of the Earth's surface which may not be placed in immediate communication with us." Us, in this case, of course, is London. "We now know that we have in our hands the means of a practical ubiquity. Distance, as a ground of uncertainty, will be eliminated from the calculations of the statesman and the merchant." Instantaneity, as this quote shows, was a common antidote to all forms of uncertainty. During the 19th century, these reveries of electricity operated with a whole repertoire of metaphors and narratives which connected different sources of knowledge. They were part of the deparadoxization of the new relation of near and far, of local and global. In this respect, they were of utmost importance for the cohesion of new global communities. Community, I want to understand here in the sense of recent philosophical debates, mainly from France, in which community is described as always already imaginative. Community, in the sense, always is a product of imagination about the shape and about the connections inside of the community. Only as such, it becomes a political actor. Thus, its self-descriptions, and I want to give more examples of these self-descriptions of communities, play a crucial role for the definition of their agency. The, quote, intimate connection between nations with race and race, quote end, which had already been expected in 1858 with the advent of transatlantic telegraphy, was supposed to expose the outdated nationalistic politics of exclusion as, quote, stagnation and death, quote end, as Charles Briggs and August Maverick said in their influential book, The Story of the Telegraph in 1858. In the middle of the 19th century, the cable was described as a, quote, vital cord of free and unobstructed interchange of each with all, quote end. I will highlight two dimensions of this quote. First, the connection was often described as animate, as living. As Laura Otis has shown, comparisons of telegraphic cables and nerves were common and of importance for both engineering and physiology. For example, Carl August von Steinheil, a pioneer of telegraphy in Germany, called telegraphy, quote, the most powerful bond of living creation, quote end. It was typical for such comparisons to expand the metaphoric realm. Cables were not only like nerves, they were nerves, as Ernst Kapp underlined in his Grundlinien einer Philosophie der Technik in 1877. And I think this book is going to be translated for the first time into English very soon. And it's a very important book for German media theory, so I think it's good that it's finally translated after more than 100 years. If we take these metaphors seriously, connection is alive when it is immediate, as a bond of living creation, and dead when it embodies division and difference. Instantaneous telegraphy, Steinheil and Kapp implied, provided a presence without interruption or difference because electricity was supposed to be everywhere at the same time. This presence came alive as the opposite of absence and death. In this sense, difference, which is the technical precondition of all transmission, was described as emptiness, as vacuum, as forlornness, or as loneliness. The separate elements, the phantasms suggested, came to life only as a unity. The presence created by immediate connections is a presence of touch and of life, while the mediating connection, including difference, can only be dead from the start. Symptomatic for the imaginative economy was, secondly, the connection of everyone with everyone else, as Briggs and Maverick suggested when they wrote that the telegraph provided a, quote, free and unobstructed interchange of each with all, quote end. Connection meant not only that each individual was connected with other individuals, but with all at the same time. The connection existed not only between isolated people, but with all at the same time. This connection was a network of everybody with all. The telegraph, said Steinheil in almost the same words as in the English book, quote, reproduces in each what is given to all, quote end. If everyone is connected with all others and each with all through a vital cord, then there can be no other and no outside of telegraphy anymore. And this idea of a unity occupied metaphysical or religious thought. Difference cannot be part of this unity. And a unity without difference may be excluding, even in political ways. It leads to an essentialistic and politically explosive conception of community, which is still in use today when, for example, Manuel Castells writes about the annihilation of space and time by electronic means. His idea of a network society, and I could name others which follow his ideas, his idea of a network society is the conceptual result of an extensive analysis of social practices of synchronization. Everyone in Castells' network society, or for example in Anthony Giddens' conception of modernity, is connected simultaneously by the power of instantaneous electricity. The notion that this society exists, quote Castells, without reference to either past or future, quote end, by electronic means is analogous to McLuhan's electric nowness on the global village, and of course to the present debates of accelerationism. The affirmation of speed, characteristic of this recent movement, may lead to a disengagement with the infrastructures transporting transmission, because this kind of acceleration always negates the delay and the temporalities that are the basis for this kind of transmission. The vitality of cable connections and the each with all were accompanied by an ignorance of the related mechanisms of exclusion. Electric presence had no difference. The white spots on the map, the places which were not part of the network, or the villages without radio, telegraph, or television were excluded. Such a space necessarily has a blind spot, the outside that is not part of the figure. But this outside is needed to determine what is inside. As a result of these new modes of community, the world became a project and the projection of bodies, organs, and senses, similar to a figure resembling Shakespeare's Puck, aka Robin Goodfellow. The frontispiece of Alexander Jones' historical sketch of the electric telegraph, which appeared more than 10 years before the laying of the transatlantic cable, showed the imagination of what would come to occur some years later. This figure holds the two ends of a world-connecting cable in her hands and pulls them on one end. Instantly, the other end moves. The figure is receiver and transmitter at the same time. The cable not only connected the individual spaces with each other, but formed a connection that ended where it began. As the phrase quoted from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream notes, quote, "I'll put a girdle around the earth in 40 minutes, quote end. Electricity, these reveries say, conducts its power instantly around the globe in a vital cord to each with all. If transmission media, enabled by the speed of electricity, are able to cause a distant place to be present simultaneously, here and now, that is, if they are able to transform distance into proximity, they eliminate the materiality at their basis. If, moreover, the possibilities of connection become more and more comprehensive, that means if every household is connected to, for example, the internet, then decentralization, the phenomenon of being in multiple places simultaneously, is transformed into a decentralized centralization, into the unity that McLuhan described as the global village. This new unity entails a fundamental change in the way that community is formed. The divisions at the base of such contacts are negated in favor of immediacy, and the world becomes a project of transmission. To praise the new global connections and to celebrate the first transatlantic cable, a sermon was held on September 1st, 1858 in Burlington, New Jersey, and the event was accompanied by an hour of ringing the church bells. The event featured not only the Star-Spangled Banner and God Save the Queen, but also the Marseillaise. At the end of this festivity, an introductory written by request by a young lady was read. Electricity, this poem implied, is necessarily, contrary to better knowledge and despite all fears, immediate, because otherwise it could not maintain its promises. Time is, yet is not, distance stands. Thought, flying on electric chain across the deep dark ocean, now can find response, immediate. God in mercy deigns to give to man another wondrous power. The electric victory over the ocean accompanied a few weeks earlier was supposed to become stasis in instantaneity, a presence that is weighted at the end of an acceleration and will eat up all distances, space and time, in an electric all-at-onceness, as McLuhan called it. To follow such notions of an annihilation of space and time by electronic means, in understanding media, means to risk losing sight of the phantasmatic dimensions of technical media and the infrastructures, of the actual modi operandi, and of their microtemporal politics. To come to a conclusion, there is an obstacle that forces acceleration-oriented media theories to adopt an essentialist and therefore politically and epistemologically precarious notion of community and of media. Through the immediacy inaugurated by these theories, the immediacy of an presumably instantaneous electricity, they are in danger of overlooking both the specific nature of the infrastructure media in question, as well as the manner in which the conditions for community are produced. Historically, such theories may have been among the first to point out the significance of media, and yet, as I hope to have shown, they also serve to undermine the potential of this new point of view. If, in the genealogy of electric acceleration, media and communication can be described as mediators of human ubiquity that are transmitted instantaneously by electricity to a brand new world of all-at-onceness. That was a quote by McLuhan. If, that is, communication in electric or electronic media is supposed to be always already omnipresent, then neither the materiality of communication, with all of its delays and interruptions, nor the differences that are necessary for community are being taken into consideration. In the spaces and times of immediacy, that is, the distances of communication are eliminated, and they are therefore susceptible to essentializations that require an internal connection between all locations, the immediacy of media that are no longer media. Thank you.